Dear listener, welcome into Other People's Shoes, Season 17, entitled Dear. This season, we venture into emotional territories as we explore words left unsent through this intimate process of writing a letter that was never meant to reach its recipient. The raw, unfiltered authenticity that speaks volumes in these letters. These unrevealed stories, confessions, and reflections held within these letters until now are powerful. Welcome to Dear, sincerely, Other People's Shoes.
Welcome in to Other People's Shoes. Welcome one and all. How is everyone today? Just take a moment. I started doing this, I think in year 3. You guys don't know this. Before I actually start, we generally have an introduction. And in that, during the introduction while it's playing, I do this cleansing breath. So I want you to do it with me today. I'm going to invite you way behind the curtain. Ready? Take that in for a second. I think today's letter is going to really need and require a moment to say, okay. Because today's letter, I just know it's a hard one. It's one that nobody ever wants to read. Anyone wants to talk about. In fact, I think it is a lot of times left unsaid. And maybe that's the whole premise of our show and our theme this season, this Dear series. And so to me and to you, let's take a breath. Let's take a moment. And let's welcome in my new friend, Kyle. Kyle, how are you today?
I'm doing real good. How are you today?
Well, I'm just, again, glad you're here. We know enough about each other, I think, to maybe be friends in real life. Share an affinity and a likeness to basketball. And I think to me, that is why I maybe like you even more, if there is a reason to like you more. And just the fact that you're a man of grace and a man of the ability to walk through some tragic things and still find a way, maybe not in the midst of it, but find a way to smile. And to me, that's powerful.
I appreciate that, Neil. You know what? I think we're all placed in situations that we don't know we're going to be placed into. And it's not a bad idea to prepare ourselves to face challenges, because once you're in it, it might be too late if you haven't prepared yourself a little bit.
You know, it almost makes me think of that old mantra from the Boy Scouts, be prepared. Isn't that their thing? And then recently I started watching on Paramount Plus MacGyver, the old MacGyver with the Swiss Army knife, that MacGyver one. And I'm thinking to myself, that guy could get out of any jam. He just figured out ways to make it work and not to elevate you higher than needs to be. Again, what I know of you, it just feels like you kind of have MacGyvered your way through some very horrific things. And again, I'm not trying to make light of your situation. To me, that's just my read on you. And again, maybe I'm misreading the room, as I often get accused of.
I think we're all kind of MacGyvering our way through things, aren't we? There's a story about a guy that I'm familiar with who was a man of God and was in a situation where he was imprisoned. Basically for that reason. He was a man of God, and we've seen that throughout history. Prophets come and prophets go, and people don't like to hear it sometimes. He was placed in prison at the end of, and he could see the end of his life coming. He prays in this moment to God. He says, how could you, he's in this little bitty cell. A couple of guys have supported him throughout this whole process. And I think he's maybe talking to God about his partners in crime. You know, it's one thing for us to struggle. It's another for us to see people we love struggle. It's almost harder to watch others face these challenges. And he says, how could you forsake us, God? Met with an answer from God that says, I just want you to know that no matter how deep you think you're going, your Savior has been deeper and he understands. And this is for your good. And he says, if you cannot just endure it, you can endure it well. Imagine the joy that will be presented to you and given to you being in my presence again. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit. The thing that struck me when I read this was it's not just endure it, because we're all going to have to endure it. We're all going to have to be put in situations that are challenging. The question is, can we endure it well? Because that's really where I think the power, we have that choice. Do we endure it or do we endure it well? The thing I like about MacGyver is that sucker was, as soon as it happened, he was looking for bubble gum. He was trying to find a penny on the ground, and he was, right, this sucker went to work. And he was trying to find, on a paper clip, and he's going to make himself whatever he could with those bits and pieces to take action and move towards the direction he wanted to go. He just didn't sit back trapped in this cage and just sit back and say, well, you know, that's it for me. He said, I'm MacGyver. I'm going to go to work. And he MacGyvered his way out of it. And if I recall, I haven't seen the show in a long time. He doesn't seem like he seemed like he had a buoyancy to him, like he had purpose. He had a plan. And even if he didn't have a plan, he started working on a plan. He started manufacturing whatever the heck he was going to manufacture. And he did it in a certain spirit that led you to believe, oh, he's getting out. MacGyver's going to MacGyver his way out of this sucker. He's probably going to have fun as he does it. It seemed like that's really what the show was about, if I recall correctly. I think that's kind of the situation that we're all put in. We're hammered with something. And we can sit back and go, boy, I didn't expect this. I'm overwhelmed. I can't take it. I'm done. Or we can MacGyver and we can say, you know what? God's going to give me the pieces and he's going to place the bubble gum under the table and the penny on the floor and the paper clip. And I got to find them and I got to start working and put this thing together and get my way through it. And I want to endure this well. I want to escape the situation and I want to come out the other side and tell people, you should have seen what I did with a paper clip and a piece of bubble gum, chewed bubble gum. And I think that's kind of the idea behind it.
I love it. I really do. I love it a lot. And I love that you were able to take what I said and really build something on that. I do. I think so many times in life, I know for me, I can only speak for me. I can't speak for others. There have been moments when I've been in the cell and I've been just looking around going, I know how I got here, but how am I going to get out of here? There are those few, and I truly mean this. I think there are those few who figure out and say, okay, this is not my final resting place. This is not where I'm going to end it all. That really do find a way to, in your words, and again, I would echo them, MacGyver my way out of here. With that being said, Kyle, help us with this question because I love to lead off truly every show with this question. What size shoes do you wear?
I'm 11 and a half, and I am a shoe guy. As a matter of fact, I got myself a new pair of basketball shoes. And I'll tell you, the only reason I chose them, first of all, they have to be comfortable. Second of all, they have to look really good. If you don't look good, you don't play good. They have to stand out. So I found myself a size 11 and a half pair of pearl white Lebron Nikes. And if you haven't seen these, they're not just white, but when you move them, they have an iridescence to them. When I saw these shoes, they were on sale at the Nike store, and I'm like, oh my gosh, if they feel anywhere close to comfortable, I'm buying those. One of the things my wife and I had talked about when we were early on in our marriage is we face challenges. We all know where pearls come from. A pearl is basically formed when a grain of sand, an irritant, gets into a shell. Slowly, the shell secretes a fluid over this irritant until it pops out this beautiful pearl. And early on in our marriage, we faced challenges as a couple. We had some kids that were real challenging. And I remember we talked about this and my wife said, boy, we're going to have to make a pearl out of this irritant. This is really irritating me. How do we turn this into a pearl? I remember one time we faced a challenge that was long and hard and we were working at it. And we were MacGyvering our way through it, really failing miserably. Still MacGyvering. She stopped me one day and she said, you know what? When we're done with this, we're going to have a whole string of pearls. It's interesting. Pearls are a big player in our family. And imagine her surprise when I actually was able to buy her some pearl necklace and earrings to match. She was thrilled and she wore them every big event in our lives. She wore those almost like a string of honor. I mean, it was almost like I've taken these difficult situations and turned them into these beautiful pearls. After she passed away, my oldest son actually bought every single one of my kids a string of fake pearls. Can't buy the real ones. They're still pretty. And half my kids wear them half the time. And I see them all the time with these pearls on. It means something to our family. So when I saw these shoes in a pearl white color, I thought, man, those are the shoes I got to have. Right now I'm wearing some, I think they're not the most recent LeBron. If you look up LeBron pearl white tennis shoes, you'll see them. They're awesome. I love them.
I'm going to Google that when we get done. I own one pair of LeBron shoes, and they're a kind of silverish with a teal to them. I don't wear them very often. I should. I'm such an MJ guy. But help us with this. Again, we're in this series, this Dear series, this idea of writing a letter to someone that for whatever reason we can't send it. Maybe something has stopped us. Maybe there's been a disconnection in the relationship. Who would you write your letter to and why?
I would write my letter to my wife. My wife and I were married for 30 years. And in October of 21, my wife got sick and passed away 10 days later suddenly, leaving me with 6 kids. Now, the good news is a lot of my kids are older now. A couple of them are married. It's not like I had to raise a bunch of little tiny tots all by myself. So I'm really grateful for that. But I'm also grateful that I had her for 30 years. We had created a top 1% marriage. And I think as I look at it now, I kind of feel like I'm writing a letter on a consistent basis to her. I wrote her a few letters when we were married. I wasn't very good at doing it very often. I'll share an example. One time I woke up one morning and I was just some days you're just so grateful for who you have in your life. And that morning I woke up and I was just feeling that way about my wife. And so I sat down at the kitchen table and I penned out this beautiful handwritten letter professing my love and telling her how much I loved her. And I left it on the kitchen table and I went to work. And later on that day, I got a call from my wife. I thought that she was just going to say, "Oh, that was so great. You're so wonderful. I appreciate you." That's not what she said. What she said was, "Are you dying or something?" And I said, "What?" And she said, "I came down to this letter. I don't know what the heck to think. Are you dying?" I said, "No, I'm not dying. I love you. And I just wanted you to know." And we got a kick out of it. She laughed and we both laughed together. Part of me was a little sore that she didn't accept it the way I sent it. The really cool part about this story is that maybe 6 months after she passed away, I was cleaning out some stuff. And I was cleaning out one of the drawers that she used to keep her socks in. You know how we have different drawers that hold different things. And as I cleaned out her sock drawer, I looked and there's an envelope. And inside this envelope are two things. One is a very religious letter that she had received when she was 12, 13, 14 years old. And the other one was that love letter I had written her. And it made me realize that it mattered. Even though she teased me about it, she kept it next to a very important thing in her life. And it made me realize that she read it. And even though she teased me about it, she knew what it meant. She knew. I go through my life now. I write a lot of stories about her. I like to write anyway. But I find myself going through my day saying, how do I live up to the legacy she left for our kids? How do I write a story that continues down that path until I get to see her again? And I feel like every time I make a good decision or help my kids through a problem or those kind of things, it's almost a love letter to her and to what she helped our family create moving forward.
I've been married 23 years this month. I cannot even fathom waking up the next day with not having my Elizabeth there. I call her my queen sometimes. I even said in a church setting one time that if something were to happen to her, I would be gone. I would disappear. I don't know if I could MacGyver my way, going back to our original thought and thread. I don't know if I could MacGyver my way through that. Even just talking about it right now with you in a hypothetical sense brings up emotions, brings up a sense of dread, a sense of, I don't want to say depression, but a sense of no, don't let that happen. As best we can, if you're willing, what was that period like from the time she got sick to the time that she did end up passing? What was that like for you, knowing full well that maybe, again, she's not going to come out of this and you're going to have to continue to get up the next day knowing that she's not there?
I had a really spiritual experience. I went to the hospital to see her on a Friday. The Friday before she ended up passing away on a Monday. When I went to the hospital and saw her on Friday, I knew that she was going to pass away. I feel like I was being prepared. I feel like it's a gift that I was being prepared. And I remember I felt that deep in my heart. I decided, I got some options. What am I going to do? And when you're in the middle of it, I don't think you can think through the pain or any of that kind of stuff. You just say, if this is what's going to happen, what do I do? I remember calling on my kids. I got two kids that live away from home, and I called them all over on Friday night, and I set them all down. And I knew she wasn't coming home. They didn't know at this point. And I said, listen, I want all you guys to know that every time your mom and I had faced seemingly overwhelming challenges, we've always turned to God and to prayer and to the guidance and the comfort and the love we can receive from Him through that relationship we have with our Savior. And I said, no matter what happens to your mom, I'm going to do that through this situation. And I would challenge you to join me on your own time, in your own way. In that moment, I could see, I think my oldest son had an inkling. He was probably 26, 27 at the time. The other kids, I think, they knew it was serious stuff at that moment. I feel blessed that, we talked about it earlier. It's a little too late to develop that kind of relationship with the Savior. Once you're in it, it makes a lot of sense to take some time and to talk to God consistently, to develop a relationship so that He's there for you in those really difficult moments. Once I knew that was going to happen, I really didn't take much time to do anything else other than realize there's a lot more responsibility I have now with the rest of my kids. And I really started creating a plan for each of them to help them. I think I was so focused on serving them in that first 6 months, I didn't really think about my own pain as much or my own disbelief. Frankly, I still wake up some days. It's been almost 3 years. Some days I wake up and I look over and she's not there. The pain is overwhelming. I don't know how that works or when you ever get over it or if you ever do, or, maybe you're not supposed to. I don't really know how that works. I do know that it's a good idea to turn to God for little things and start to create a relationship because you never know when the storm is going to be so heavy, it can't be you anymore. One of the things that I found interesting is after she passed away, I found myself looking in the scriptures for a scripture that says God won't give you more than you can handle, because I had heard that. Well, I wasn't able to find it. That scripture does not exist.
It's still not in there. No. Yeah, it's not in there.
And I'm like, holy crap, I've been taught my whole life that God won't give you more than you can handle, and it's not in the scripture. What the heck am I supposed to do? It was in those moments that I realized I didn't have to handle those things by myself. I could turn to the Comforter and be comforted by him. I'll share with you an example of that. After she passed away, I found myself sleeping on the couch. I couldn't go into my room. Everything in there was her. I mean, my bedroom is still pink. Okay. That's not who I am. I'm probably too masculine. I couldn't go in there. And I think I slept on the couch for probably a month or so. And I realized after about a month or so that my kids are seeing this. Your kids see more than they hear. And I knew that they knew Dad can't go to his room. Eventually, I got to face this storm. One day, I decided I was going to be brave and I was going to go sleep in my own bed that night. And I went upstairs that night. For 30 years, we had prayed at the end of our bed together. I had a pillow that I would slide out because I have some bad knees. I had some knee issues from basketball. I slid my pillow out and kneeled on my pillow and I started to pray. And I was overwhelmed with feelings of anger and rage and discouragement. And I was mad at God. And I said, God, I'm kneeling on the same pillow that I've knelt with my wife for 30 years at the end of the same bed. How could you do this? Anything but this. Just felt so angry. And I was like, didn't we go to church? Didn't we try to raise our kids with good hearts? And just went through this laundry list of things we had done that we were supposed to do. And I just kept going back to how could you? And I was just filled with rage in that moment towards God. And almost immediately, I realized, you know what? I know what's going on here. At this moment, the devil thinks Kyle is rudderless. I'm going to throw everything. If I can ever get Kyle, now's the time. He's mad at God. I'm going to pour everything on I can. If I can get Kyle, maybe I can get him now. So I'm going to fill his mind with these thoughts and these negative emotions and all these things. And I thought, you know what? I see what he's doing. I see what's happening here. My whole life, I've turned to God during difficult times. Now I'm going to be mad at God and not turn to him in my most difficult time. I thought, you know what? I'm not doing this. I am not going to run down that path of pain and misery and suffering because I don't have to. And I remember thinking, I'm going to start a new tradition and I'll slide the pillow to the side of the bed and I'm going to start a new tradition. And now I'm going to pray next to my angel wife, Shelly. And when I did that and moved to the side of the bed and I started praying again, I felt so much comfort and so much warmth and so much love. And I realized that it's when we have those struggles and those trials, when we're at our weakest is when the devil wants to come at us hard. He wouldn't go so hard at us if we weren't valuable to God. It reminded me of in some of the trickiest times of my life is when I felt like God leaves and Satan comes in and just slams me. And I think the devil wouldn't waste time on me if he didn't think I was worth wasting time on. Maybe I'm important to God and he wants to get me out of that situation. And I knew in those moments that I needed to really turn to him and lay that pain and that suffering and that anguish at his feet and say, lead me and guide me and tell me what I'm supposed to do. How can I be a force for good and a light for you? Let me feel your presence and just lead me in that direction.
Thanks for sharing that. I say often, I can relate with anybody. I can get in their shoes. I think God's wired me to have an empathetic heart. This is one pair of shoes I was a little hesitant to jump in. I could get in the shoes. I could fit in the size. The Lebrons, I could even get around. That is a tough road to go down. What do you miss most about Shelly? Is there a trait or a quality that you really feel like you now need to carry on since she's no longer able to do that?
It's interesting you say that. I was thinking about this just a couple of days ago. When we're married and we have our wives with us, it's not unusual for us to think, you know what, my wife wouldn't really like this, but I don't really care. I'm going to go do this thing because it's just something that gives me And we make decisions sometimes and we think, if she finds out about that, she probably won't be happy. I mean, I'm not talking about serious, horrible things. I'm just talking about little simple things here and there. What I've noticed is that we need those checks and balances in our life. As men, we need a good woman to say, yeah, you're running down the wrong path. We need them to help us. We need that help. What worried me is that when she's not around for that help, what do? I need a check and balance in my life. And so what I've found is I still say those things to myself, but now I find myself being closer to doing what she would want me to do. It's almost, well, she probably wouldn't like that. Well, then I probably shouldn't do it. Because I know once I start running down that path, I'm liable to run way down it. I find that happens to me very frequently. The thing I miss the most, and I'm still learning how to manage this, is a good friend of mine a couple of months ago, I tried to catch up with him and I couldn't catch up with him. He was just out of range or something. And he calls me the next day and he says, sorry, I was up in the mountains, walking in the mountains. And I said, oh yeah, did you go on a hike or something? He said, well, sometimes when I get overwhelmed or the world is too much, he said, I'll go up into nature. I'll go up into the mountains and I'll walk and I'll feel God's presence in my life. And I'll just walk around and it rejuvenates me and it re-energizes me and it reorganizes my thoughts and it settles me. And he says, what do you do for that, Kyle? And I said, well, I'll tell you what I used to do. I used to go talk to my wife. She had a presence about her that helped settle me, I didn't have to go to the mountains. I would just go sit down with my wife and say, I'm a little unsettled and I'm frustrated or I'm discouraged and I'm just looking to be, and we would talk and she would comfort me. It was her, knowing her love was my settling. It was my walk in the woods. It was my walk in the fresh air in the mountains. That's been the thing I think I miss the most is I just can't, I've got to figure out another way. Obviously, we can always turn to prayer, but there's something about somebody sitting down with you or talking to you or somebody that you trust that has your best interest at heart, that loves you, being able to just talk back to you and comfort you in those moments. And I think that's the thing I miss the most is just that presence and the spirit of love she brought to those encounters and to our home in general.
Is there something you learned about yourself that maybe you didn't know before this whole situation?
The first thing that pops into my mind is I really thought I could handle pretty much anything. I'm a tough dude, man. I grew up in inner city Dallas in a tough neighborhood. I would man up and just tough my way through a lot of stuff. I mean, bring it. My attitude was, you got something, bring it. Ain't nothing I can't manage. And I realized after my wife passed away that you can't just man up. I couldn't just man up to this. I really had to develop in a stronger way my relationship with God. I really had to turn to him for comfort in situations. It was a storm. I was so strong and used to facing so many storms just because I would just power through. I have become much more emotional. I've found myself more sympathetic and empathetic to others' situations. Somebody would describe to me in the old days problem, and I would think that ain't even a problem. You don't even know what problems are. Seriously, that's what's bugging you? Dude, let me tell you about problems. That was my attitude. And after this whole event, I realized I couldn't just power through this. And I realized that I've been given a gift of buoyancy and happiness and joy. Maybe other people weren't given that same gift. They have their gifts. I should never say or look at somebody else's situation and say that you think that's a problem. That's not a problem. It's a problem to them. It's a challenge. I've just been so blessed to be able to face so many challenges with such a buoyant spirit that it made me realize how many gifts I'd actually been given. It made me more compassionate to other people who haven't been given those same gifts. I used to just think, well, just use your mind, work your way through it. You're strong. Why can't you seriously? That's what's holding you back? I don't do that anymore. I don't know what these people have gone through. I don't know what their challenges are. I don't know what gifts they've been given or haven't been given. I do know what gifts I've been given. And I'm so grateful for those gifts because it's helped me to learn to be more compassionate and understand I didn't do anything to deserve some of the things I have. These are just God's way of blessing me. There's no way I could have deserved this. When God just throws stuff at you and blesses you with just certain things, you're like, wow, I can't take credit for this anymore. It humbles me to know that I'm able to manage certain things that may be difficult for other people.
In my marriage and even in my relationship with my wife, There are dates that I will forever remember. The first date that comes to mind for me is December 12th, 1997. I can tell you exactly where I was at 8:15 in the morning when I skipped a class to go ask her out. By the way, her answer shocks people. She said, sure, to be my girlfriend. Most people say yes. George Strait has an amazing song. Check yes or no. That wasn't an option, apparently, for her. She said, sure. So that's fun. So I remember that date. And then fast forward, I had to look it up to make sure I got the date right. Sometimes I get old and forgetful. To the year 2000. It's November 21st. It's the day also North Carolina became a state for those state aficionados. Fun fact, if you were needing that for Jeopardy, Final Jeopardy, you'll be squared away now. November 21st, 2000. Go to my parents' home where she was living at the time because I had moved out. And so she moved in with my mom. And I went upstairs and I had gone to the dollar store and I bought this like little stuffed animal bear and it had a little sack. And I put the ring inside the sack. And then I asked her on a blanket with Martinelli sparkling cider and goldfish crackers. And I said, hey, will you marry me? And her answer, I bet you can guess it, was yes. No, if you guess that, you're incorrect. It was actually sure. And then I said, really, sure, again? And she goes, okay, fine, yes. And then every year, January 7th is her birthday. So that's one you can't forget either, especially when we got married in 2001, August 18th. So those are some of the dates that are forever etched in my mind that you can never forget. Don't ever forget. Is there any dates that you have that are maybe similar to mine? Or is there anything that comes to mind when I talk about that type of obsession maybe?
There's one, and I don't know the exact date. I'm not a date guy, but I'm a moment guy. There was a moment I remember when we had 4 sons. They were feral. So they were wild animals. I grew up kind of a wild animal myself, so it's not really new to me. My wife was very kind and sweet and feminine. She was kind of the opposite of me. At her core was just this beauty. She glowed with this beauty. I remember we were really struggling with my sons were animals, and she was just out of whack. And I would come home from work and she would be staring out the front window, waiting for me to show up like, I can't take it anymore. You know, the kind of things that we go through when we have kids, right? And I remember the stress in our home was overwhelming, and it was really building. One morning, a Saturday morning, we were living just outside of Dallas in a little country town, Rocket, Texas, just outside of Dallas, little bitty town. And I remember one morning at 6:30 a.m., I have one son that's autistic, more severe, started screaming bloody murder at 6:30 a.m. in the morning. And I remember it woke us all up. We couldn't tell, because he was nonverbal, we couldn't tell what he needed or what he wanted, or if he was hurt, or if he was dying, or if he just had lost a puzzle piece. Who knew? The stress that ensued that morning was overwhelming. Normally, one of these meltdowns would maybe last between 15 minutes and 45 minutes. This one lasted 4 hours. Stress was out the roof. It was like a tornado was hitting our house at the same time as a flood at the end of the world. We kept trying to calm him down, and he would get mad again and ramp back up. And I remember when we finally got him calmed down after 4 hours, my wife had it. She was at a breaking point, and I was too. The stress was overwhelming. We couldn't live like this. I think sometimes when stress is so overwhelming, you look for somebody to blame. And in this case, we blamed each other. And sometimes we blame the person that we should love the most. It started this real horrible argument that kept going on. And typically my wife wouldn't argue for too long. That wasn't her core. Her core was beauty and kindness and love. But she was done. After a little bit of this arguing, I realized it wasn't stopping, and I was getting madder and madder, and I knew this wasn't going to end well. So I remember putting my keys in my pocket and going out on the front porch of my house. My car was sitting there, and I had my keys in my pocket, and I thought, this is not the life I signed up for. My wife doesn't like me. My kids are out of control. They're no fun. This is not it. And I was just raging in my mind, and I thought, you know what? I'm getting in my car and I'm leaving, and I'm not coming back. I'm done. I am done. I remember in that moment, a memory of when I was an 11 or 12-year-old kid came into my mind. And I was playing in a baseball game, and I was playing shortstop. And I remember that vividly because 2 outs and we were about to win the game. And a kid hit the ball to me, and I made an error. And as so often happens, the next couple of kids got hits and got on base, and we lost. They won. It was all my fault. I made the error that opened the floodgates. And so I remember going over to my dad. I had tears in my eyes. When you're 11 or 12 and you lose a baseball game, it's all your fault. Nothing worse. That's your life. And I had tears in my eyes. And I said, you know what, Dad? I wish the ball hadn't been hit to me, because then we could have won. And I remember my dad got down on my level. He kneeled down. He said, you know what, Kyle? That's not the way we do things in life. You don't ever want your success or failure to be in anybody else's hands. He says, you want to work. He said, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have failures. You're going to have successes. But he says, don't you ever pass the buck to anybody else. That's not what we do in our family. We take responsibility. You go home and you practice, and I'll go home and I'll hit you 1,000 grounders. And you want every ball, every game hit to you. He said, you want to take every last shot of every basketball game. You want the ball in your hands when it matters. Don't you ever pass the buck if something matters to you. And that memory was so ingrained in me at that moment. I thought, I can't leave my family. This is the most important thing in the world to me, right? Family and my kids and my wife should be what I love the most. I thought, I'm not leaving. I can't leave. But I've tried everything. I don't know what else to do. And I remember in that moment walking in, we had a big giant pecan tree in our front yard. It was about 40 feet tall, a huge pecan tree. And I knelt under that pecan tree and I prayed. And I said, I've done everything. I've tried everything. I don't know what else to do. Help me. What do I need to do? I want to have a happy family. I want my kids to love being here, my wife to love me. I want to love her. What do I do? And I remember real clearly feeling like God reached out to me in that moment, and I almost heard it. I'm not going to say I heard it, but I felt like I heard it. We know these moments. And God said, the problem is not your kids, and the problem is not your wife. The problem is you. Fix you. Initially, I thought, it ain't me. I mean, come on. I'm the only sane person around here. That's how we all think. My ego was, the more I thought about it, the more I realized, you know what? I'm the only person I can change. I should be leading my family. I'm failing. My family's a mess. And if I'm the leader and my family's a mess, it's me. And I remember I went back into the house and my wife was still mad. I could tell she was mad. I was hoping she saw me kneeling and maybe that would soften her, or she didn't see me. I don't know what happened. But I walked in. I said, you know what, Shelly? I'm not leaving and I'm going to fix this. And she said, good luck. And I thought, she's lost faith in me. She's completely lost faith in me. I thought, first thing I need to do is get her faith back in me, right? And I remember it just became my mission, re-earn her trust in me and to really figure the whole thing out. What can I do? And when something is your mission, you serve endlessly and you just go at it. I remember the more I served and the more I worked at it, God says, seek and ye shall find. Ask and it shall be given unto you. I just started asking and seeking and looking, and a lot of patience. And it helped us to repair, my wife and I, to repair our relationship. It helped me to be more patient and kind and loving with my kids. It was a tipping point in our lives. We got to a point where we called ourselves a top 1% happy marriage. People would say, well, how can you quantify that? Well, she believed it and I believed it. That means it is so. That's quantifying. Top 1% happy family. It was that moment, that tipping point moment in my life where I was ready to leave. Through some experiences as a kid and through God's guidance, I was told, don't leave, figure it out. I'll help. Come to me, pray. I want to lead you to where you need to be. If you work, I'll give you what you need to lead your family back to regain the trust in your wife and restore that. And that is what we have now. Our family that's the kind of family we have. We love each other. We're kind to each other. We treat each other. And before my wife passed away, we had a top 1% happy marriage. And I'm so grateful we restored that. I feel like I had something that very few people have, even if they have 50-year marriages. I feel like I have something in my 30-year marriage that very few people get to experience. And I'm so grateful for that.
You mentioned your kids. I would imagine, just because I know how kids are and I know how I am as a child of my parents, I heard this pastor say years ago, more is caught than taught. When I say that to you, what does that bring about for you?
I was a real challenging kid myself. And if I saw my parents, if they said something and they did something different, they were just flat out hypocrites. They lost the ability to influence me. And I was almost looking for that. I think because I was by nature, I was just a challenging kid. I was a middle child, growing up in a tough neighborhood, chip of anger on my shoulder anyway. I felt like I was getting a raw deal. I think a lot of times as parents, it's almost more important that we behave a certain way than it is we tell our kids to behave a certain way. When we say one thing and we do another, it's confusing for them. And they wonder why would, just subconsciously, I think a lot of this stuff happens. Really, to me, it's they're going to learn more from us by how we behave, how we act, how we treat people. I remember after my wife passed away, I don't know, maybe a year and a half into it, I woke up one morning and I came downstairs and my daughter was down there. I have one daughter, I have 5 sons and 1 daughter. My daughter said to me, I want you to know, Dad, that God can take better care of Mom than you can. And I said, what? And she said, I heard you praying last night. I walked by your room to tell you something and I heard you praying, so I didn't interrupt you, but I listened. And I heard you telling God, please take care of Shelly in your prayer. And I want you to know God can take better care of her than you can. And I said, wait a minute, how often do you listen to me pray? Sometimes, which means probably a lot. Do I need to shut my door? And she said, please don't shut your door. And it made me realize, I don't know. I kneel at my bed and I pray in my room and I pray out loud. She caught me. And I've heard from my other kids, I went around and asked my other kids, have you caught me praying? And every single one of them have caught me praying. There's something about that when you're talking to God and when you're expressing your fears and worries and doubts and laying them at his feet and then asking for them and praying over them. They hear that stuff. It was a really powerful message to me that she knows that relationship exists and she understands the value of that relationship. I think there's nothing more powerful than them seeing us create a world where we believe that and then inviting them to believe it too because of the strength it can give them and us as well.
I was thinking back over my marriage as you're talking about Shelly and talking about your marriage. I was thinking about some of the gifts that my wife has given me, the physical and the spiritual and the emotional. And I was trying to pin down my favorite gift that she's given me. I think I narrowed it down. So I'm kind of walking through this in real time. I think the greatest gift she's ever given me outside of her love, I mean, that's a good one. That's a great one. It's an easy one. I feel like that's a layup. If going back to basketball, that's an easy 2. There's no easy 3s, it seems like, but there's an easy 2. But I think the greatest gift truly she's ever given me is the gift of her forgiveness. Is there a greatest gift that Shelly could have given you or maybe did give you?
Absolutely there is. And this is so clear to me. And it was clear to me prior to her passing away. I'll just start by saying she taught me it takes more of my strength to be a good, kind man than it does to be a man. And I'll give you an example. Early on in our marriage, we were watching TV together. On TV, there was a story about a guy who had kidnapped a little girl and abused this little girl. I remember starting to sweat as I watched this story. And I looked down and my fists were balled up. Out loud, I said, boy, don't you ever let me catch that guy. Boy, I would put a beating on him. You see some injustice and it affects you. And she put her hand on my shoulder and she said to me, you know what, Kyle, maybe you can focus on the family and compassion for their situation. Put less focus on the punishment you'd like to put on him. And I remember thinking, is that how she sees the world? It's so much more beautiful than the way I see the world. I was a justice guy. When the time comes, I want to be a mercy guy. I don't want justice. I want mercy. She taught me there's a lot of ways to look at situations, but one of the most beautiful ways to look at a situation is always to ask yourself, how can I do this in a spirit of love? I can't be furious about a guy kidnapping a girl in a spirit of love. I can be compassionate toward the family in a spirit of love. That started to really change me. And I think she took me from a man into a good man, taught me that there's a different way to look at the world through kindness and through beauty and through compassion and through love. And she slowly and surely converted me over that beautiful part of her. Keep in mind, I'm still a man. And she would tell me, it's better for you to be a warrior in the garden than a gardener in the war, Kyle. So I'm okay. You're a warrior. Be a warrior. I just want you in the garden with me all the time. Unless there's a war. She wasn't trying to take the masculinity and the strength and the courage and the power out of me. She wanted me to focus on the compassion and the kindness and the love. Over years of watching her do it and seeing her results, she helped me to change my spirit. A scripture that says the natural man is an enemy to God. And she helped me move away from that natural man to the man that really could see the world in a different way. And I think her greatest gift to me was just modeling that behavior and allowing me to come along for the ride. Eventually, hopefully, try to snatch the pebble from her hand when I was ready to be that person.
We talked about moments ago dates. And I know you said you're not a date guy. You don't remember dates, you remember moments, which I love. I'm just a nut when it comes to dates, and I associate the date with the moment. A little different thinking. Are birthdays harder? Christmas is harder? Mother's Day harder? What are the harder days? And again, maybe moments in those days?
Yeah, so you know what? I'm a kind of a prepare guy. So a lot of times if I know a birthday's coming up, I'll prepare myself to face the storm. Remember, I called my son one day, and the 1 year anniversary of her passing, and we were talking, my oldest son and I, and he said, do you know what's coming up, right? And I said, oh yeah, I know the date's coming up. And he said, well, what are you going to do on that day? And with a smile on my face, I said, well, I guess I'm just going to dive into the depths of hell. But he didn't hear it like that. And it scared him. And he said, please tell me you're coming back. And I realized the mistake I had made in telling him that. I said, no, I want you to understand. I realized that there are times where we have to let pain and that suffering is a normal part of life. It doesn't do us any good to suppress it or push it down. We're going to have to face it occasionally. But I like to know when I'm going to face it. I want to plan those days so that I can face it in the right place, or, have a friend call me at 5 o'clock that day and make sure I'm okay. Prepare for those days. And what I've discovered is I prepare for hard days, and they're generally not that hard. What gets me is the day after. I've set myself up for success on the anniversaries of her death. And the next day I wake up and I'm overwhelmed. And I'm like, what the heck? I didn't plan for this. And so what I found is it's moments that can get to me just, I want to say maybe 2 weeks ago, or not even 2 weeks ago. It's been in the past 10 days. I wasn't feeling great. I woke up one morning and I had a dream about Shelly. When I do that, it's really tough. I know it's a dream. I've gotten to where when I see her in my dreams, I know it's a dream. I know it's not real. If I talk to her, I wake up automatically. And so I don't want to talk. I just want to look at her, hold her, or just be with her. And I had a dream about her, and I woke up and I was just overwhelmed with grief because she wasn't with me. And I could feel myself spiraling. And I thought, you know what? I've got a meeting with a guy today, but he'll understand. He knows my situation. I can't just push through everything. I'm a man and I can push through a lot, but the world will understand if I just kind of fall apart and stay to myself today and just avoid everybody. And maybe today's the day I go into the depths of hell, right? I mean, I don't know, and I'm laying in bed justifying all the reasons that I've got to feel the grief and the pain and just fall apart. Maybe I can just tell God about it. I slid out of bed and I pulled my pillow out. And I kneeled down and I just got real with God. I said, I can't do it today. I'm hurting. I can't do it. I don't know what to do. I miss her so bad. I just need help. I just need your help. And maybe just today, you can throw down some extra special stuff on me. I just need to get through the day. Talk to God about my misgivings and my failures. And I just had a conversation. And I found myself after a little while, I just kind of, but I like to pray in a certain order. And I always end with gratitude in my prayers. It's kind of the way I do it. I like to always end my prayers in gratitude because I know where good stuff comes from. And I remember as I ended my prayer, I just started thanking God for everything, started going through these lists in my mind. And the more I did, the better I felt. And then after a few minutes, I remember just saying amen and popping up, just like, you know what? I got it. I'm ready. And I got started with my day and I ended up meeting with the guy and everything went great. And throughout the day, I just felt so uplifted and comforted and I felt buoyant. Realized pretty quickly, God doesn't want us to be in pain and suffering. He's paid that price. Savior's paid that price for us, not just through our sins, but through grief and pain. And he's there. I was spiraling and the smartest thing I could do was pray and just get it all out there. That weight was taken off me. And I was given something different in that moment. I've gotten pretty habitual about it. Sometimes it's harder than other times. I think it's never a bad idea when you're feeling overwhelmed or discouraged or frustrated is to drop to your knees and just tell God about it. Have a conversation. He wants us to be a light. He wants us to be happy. He wants us to feel joy. He wants us to know we can make it through anything with his help. And he's there to help. I have a testimony. He is there. And he will help us in those moments. You mentioned before, you don't think it's something you could go through. And I didn't either. I've talked to a lot of guys. I'm going to make a suggestion. Don't put yourself through that mental game. Don't say, what am I going to do if my wife passes away? Don't do that. That's not a game you want to play. I don't think any of us want to play it. It's not fun. There's no productive way. There's a lot of other games you could play. That's not one I would recommend. Being prepared to pray about all the little things, all those moments in your life, when you lose all your files of all the recordings you've got, right? Is pray and say, God, I need some help. Whatever it is, lead me, give me some direction. I'm not afraid to work. Put me to work and guide me in the direction that you want me to go, and I'll do it. We'll feel buoyed up and our light will shine. And it's not our light, it's his light. He wants that to shine.
Thank you for making reference to my catastrophic file dump that happened. Kyle clearly was one of the ones affected, the Magnificent Seven, as I call them. So thank you for that, Kyle. If there's a guy listening right now, or maybe even a woman who has walked through this, and maybe they're a month in, maybe they're 6 months in, maybe they're a year in, maybe they're 6 years in, who knows, whatever stage they're at, what encouragement would you have for them to continue to breathe, to put on the shoes, as I would say, as in going into battle or going into continuing to live? What advice or maybe counsel would you have for them? And I know you're not a doctor, so you can't necessarily give clinical advice per se, but just from your perspective, what would you give them?
So I would say this is every discouragement or frustration or trial you faced, you've gotten through it so far. Here's what I've learned is when you tell people about past experiences, whether they're good or bad, you almost always tell it with a smile on your face. At some point, you're going to talk about you're losing all these files, and you've already created a name for those, the Magnificent Seven. I love it. And you're going to talk about this with a smile on your face. You're going to know it was a challenge. You worked through it. You came out the other side. Somehow you grew or somehow you learned. The refiner's fire, it worked in your life. I think the answer to that question is this. Man, I've got a magnificent story to tell. Nobody wants to hear a story about an easy life of no pain or suffering. Nobody writes movies about that. There's a character, and the character goes through some trials or tribulations and then comes out the other side, and then you're like, whoa, what a great story. Some stories aren't as great. Some stories are fantastic. The question is, what story are we going to write for ourselves? I'm going to write a magnificent tale of triumph over tragedy. That is going to be my story. I don't like it. If I had a choice, it would not be my story. I don't like the story. I don't want that story. Absolutely last story I'd want. If it is my story, then it's going to be dang good. There's going to be, at the end of it, you're going to be like, dang, that was the greatest movie I've ever seen. I get to write the script for what happens now, right? And I know that script can be full of pain and suffering and anguish, and I can ruin families, and I can be bitter and angry and discouraged and turn into a villain in this life. Or I can turn into a hero of my own story. I heard a producer one time talking about the Marvel movies. He said the villain and the hero have the same backstory. He said the villain grows up and has been hurt by somebody, and the world hurt him. And the villain grows up and says, the world hurt me, I'm going to hurt the world back. He said the hero has the same backstory. The hero was hurt by somebody or pained, or the hero says, you know what? The world has hurt me. I don't want that to happen to anybody else. And they become the hero. And I'm pretty clear what kind of person I want to become. And it's my choice. Why do I do podcasts and talk about my pain and suffering? I want to write the script. And guess what? I don't imagine there's never going to be any other trials in my life. It ain't over for me. That ain't the way life works. If I think I'm done being molded, I'm barking up the wrong tree. I know I'm going to have more challenges in my life. But the question is, what do we do with it? Do we spread joy and happiness and love for the rest of our lives and create a beautiful story? Or do we become a villain? Or do we write a tragedy or a horror? I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of stories. I know what kind of story I'm writing, and I challenge those to say, you know what? I get to write my script from here on out. What kind of script would I write? What kind of script do I want to write for those around me and for myself? I know what kind of script I want to write. Think about what kind of script you want to write and just start acting. You're the biggest actor in your own movie. We get to make choices.
I love that a lot. Thanks for sharing that insight, Kyle. I really appreciate that. I mean, I've loved it all, but I really have enjoyed that last part that you shared. One chapter does not define our whole story. It doesn't make the book, and it doesn't necessarily wreck the book. It just adds to that story. And I love that metaphor and that analogy there for sure. Well, Kyle, if someone wants to get connected with you and maybe learn more about your story and maybe have you on their show, every now and then podcasters alike do listen to me. I like to think I've I've gotten to that level where other people listen to me. How can someone connect with you? And is that something you're willing to maybe walk through with someone?
Absolutely. KyleJetsel.com. Just type my name in, .com. It'll take you to my webpage, contact page on there. You can email me. I'd love to chat with you. Anything I can do to be helpful, brighten people's lives or spread joy, that's what I'm about.
I appreciate that tremendously. And again, Kyle, I just want to say thank you, man. Thank you for your tears. Thank you for your honesty and your raw and your real and your authenticity. I really value that in men, that you can be, again, this masculine dude, but still have feelings and still have a heart. So thanks for that.
Thank you so much for having me. I sure appreciate it, Neil.
All right, guys and gals, kids and campers alike, that is it. That is all. We are now down to one show. Next week, season finale day. Hang out for that. It's a doozy. Listen, I used to be in the band. I was a trumpet player, but I learned the crescendo, or not a music aficionado, or maybe didn't take music theory. Here's how the crescendo works. It starts out small, and then it slowly gets louder. Well, in this case, we started out kind of small. We've grown and blossomed into an amazing season. I don't want to say it's my favorite season yet. Man, it's close. I wonder about this for you as we leave and as we go. What's your chapter 1 look like? Was it horrific? Was it awful? Okay, so then we go to chapter 2. What did that look like? And then we jump ahead maybe to chapter 16. What did that look like? And maybe for you, you haven't finished the story yet. It's still being written. Back to Kyle's question, who gets to be the author and finisher of your story? Who gets to do that? Who is writing it? Who is behind the keyboard? Who has the pen in hand? Let me know. You can let me know at opspodcast.com. You can let me know on the socials at OPS Podcast Show under Facebook, Instagram, and X. And before we go, don't ever forget, remember, when we walk in other people's shoes, we really do get a different perspective on life. Again, stay tuned till next week's season finale day as we walk in other people's shoes.